Thank you very much, sir, for your thoughtful presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you that the program is going live on DBC News. And so now may I request our another dignified keynote speaker, Dr. Imtiaz Ahmed, Professor, Department of International Relations, University of Dhaka.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Honorable Foreign Minister, distinguished delegates, my co-panelists and friends out there. What I will do is, get straight into what is to be done. I'm not sure whether the slides would be shown. I don't see the slides, so I'm a little bit confused. No slides. Okay, so bear me out. Normally, I have colorful slides, but somehow I think they thought of not using the slides. Anyway, my first slide, before I come to what is to be done, and I'll be very precise. One has to look into root causes of why we have a thing called Rohingya. And this is not the first time. We had the same thing in the 70s and the 90s, and they returned with little, exception. They returned, and then we have again in 2017. So if we want to look in the root causes, there are three. One is the issue of identity. We have to be very clear. The reason why it is not getting resolved is Myanmar is not recognizing the identity of the people. You call them Rohingyas or Arakanese Muslims. And some people are still, debating on that, but I just want to, make this very simple, that the debate is less now because at the ICJ, where even Aung San Suu Kyi was present, none of the members, including Aung San Suu Kyi, not for once mentioned that they are illegal Bangladeshis or Bengalis, etc., etc. The word they used was Arakanese Muslims. Arakan is not inside Bangladesh. If they're Arakanese Muslims, they have to return to Arakan. Simple as that. Now, slide is live. Thank you very much. The second one, we need to be very precise, is the 2008 Constitution as to why it is not happening. In the Constitution, and this is an interesting book by the grandson of the former Secretary General of the United Nations, Uthan, and I'm sure some of you would be knowing him very well. His grandson, Thant Minh Tue, has written clearly that one of the stumbling blocks is that in the Constitution, you have this point that if a particular population constitutes 0.1% of the national population, which would be around 50,000 people, and if they live in 2 consecutive villages, which would be 100,000, they would have an autonomous zone. They will have autonomy automatically. There are people or there are races recognized by the Myanmar whose population is much less than Rohingyas. So it's not the issue of having a bigger population or simply put, and Minh Tue argues that the reason why they are still hesitant is because of racism. And I'm sure some of you are now familiar that even Aung San Suu Kyi, when she was in the UK, also wrote some pieces very close to racism, absolutely arguing a racist understanding of Myanmar. So the Constitution, and with that comes the autonomy. So this is the problem. So we need to go back to the root causes, because unless there is an amendment to their constitution or bring up new bill or something, which would give some recognition, even if they use the word Arakanese Muslims, forget the word Rohingyas, that I think should take us to where we want, at least the international community wants them to be. Now, what is to be done to reach there? That's the issue. Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina made it very clear back in 2017 look at her 5 points, and you will see that they are very similar to Kofi Annan Commission's report and very similar to even, I would say, Chinese 3-point solution to the problem. And these are the 5 points I just want to reiterate so that people who have, probably forgotten what our Prime Minister said. Number 1, Myanmar must unconditionally stop the violence and the practice of ethnic cleansing in the Rakhine State immediately and forever. Number 2, Secretary General of the United Nations should immediately send a fact-finding mission to Myanmar. Third, all civilians, irrespective of religion and ethnicity, must be protected in Myanmar. And then, of course, there was the idea safe zones could be created inside Myanmar under UN supervision. Number 4, ensure a sustainable return of all forcibly displaced Rohingyas in Bangladesh to their homes in Myanmar. And the 5th one was the Kofi Annan Commission report recommendations must be immediately implemented unconditionally and in their entirety. So the way forward is very clear from Bangladesh standpoint, and I'm sure the Honorable Foreign Minister would be able to say more on this. Now, there are 5 things when it comes to what is to be done, 5 things I think, at least from my point of view, I think is important. The first thing is there are 3 major powers who are tilted toward Myanmar. Of course, China. Professor Delwar has already mentioned that. We also have Japan and India. Now, what I think they need to do is to decouple the Rohingya issue from their strategic interest. We understand that they have strategic interest. It's, as an IR person, I'm familiar with the strategic interest on the border, on the insurgency, particularly with India. I think Myanmar helped them to stop the insurgency. Not to mention, India would also require another route to the Bay of Bengal. We understand that. China would have the same thing in the southern borders. So what I think they should do, and the rest of the community, is to decouple the Rohingya issue from the strategic interest. Have your business interest, have your investments, but when it comes to Rohingya, you decouple it. And how do you do that? There are several ways of doing it. One is try using the word Rohingya to begin with. Neither India nor Japan uses even the word Rohingya. There has been a shift a little bit with Japan. This is for the first time they were co-sponsors of the General Assembly resolution. That, I think, is the first decoupling we see, particularly with Japan. We are yet to see that with India. I think this is important. Also, you can also decouple by engaging with the Rohingya diaspora or the Rohingya civil entity that is there all around the world. That itself will give message to Myanmar that things are changing. And there are many ways to decouple the Rohingya issue from the strategic interest. Number 2, continue with the internationalizing the issue of justice. This is absolutely important. And as I say, the provisional verdict, people did not look at it carefully. It's unanimous, but then more importantly, the provisional verdict recognized the Rohingya identity. And that was the first time I think the Rohingyas got a recognition from a legal international body. So that, I think, is also important, and that needs to be flagged. And nowhere you have this issue of whether they're former Bengalis or whatever the common people in the streets of, Yangon or somewhere in Mandela, they talk about, some other concept. Probably they do. But the point, we need to see what is happening. So ICJ, ICC, and all of the international human rights needs to reactivate, and I think this is something even the media can also work. Now with the pandemic and the Zoom and Facebook and all other gadgets that we have, I think it's important to reactivate or re-energize the human rights activists all across the world. so that time and again you have an interaction on the issue of justice. Number three, reimposing the sanctions. Now, the argument I hear from time to time is that if you give sanctions, then the common people will be hurt. Now, I find that extraordinary because there are countries in the world where you have sanctions. You have sanctions in Iran. You have sanctions against North Korea. Aren't there common people in Iran? Aren't there common people in North Korea? So I don't understand this particular argument why we are using this word, common people would get hurt. The point here is that common people don't benefit from those investments anyway. Probably the common people would benefit if justice is done to a particular community so that justice would be done to the common people. So to have a different understanding on the issue of justice and the issue of sanction on Myanmar really doesn't help. I think this is something that we need to work on seriously. The fourth one is engaging the Rohingya diaspora. There are 19 countries where we have Rohingyas. Well, Bangladesh has the most, but then there are other countries also with Rohingyas. It's a huge diaspora, and nobody is really investing on creating a civil entity out of the Rohingyas. Time and again we hear about ARSA. Why isn't the international community investing on the civil entity of creating an entity? That entity will then start bargaining and deciding the fate of the Rohingyas. Because at the end of the day, it's not an issue of Myanmar and Bangladesh. It's not an issue of, we are friends with Myanmar even today. We engage them, we trade with them. They are not our enemies. Myanmar is not our enemies at all. The issue is the problem with the Myanmar state and the Rohingya people, or the residents of, or citizens, if you want to say, of Rohingya. So it's not a Myanmar-Bangladesh issue. It's an issue between the people of Rohingya. So if that thing we have in mind, so I think it's important to look broadly beyond the Rohingyas who are residing in Bangladesh, look into the diaspora, and there are some active diaspora. And we have seen how one particular group are engaged with Argentina, where a case is there on the Rohingya. Look at it. And nobody is flagging the way it should be flagged. So my argument here is, it's important that the international community invest in the Rohingya diaspora, create a civil entity, and that civil entity will then take the burden of the people globally and engage at the end with the Myanmar government on how to resolve the issue. Finally, I think we have a window of opportunity. Now that there is no democracy, well, we had a pseudo-democracy, and I was quite surprised that the international community bought their pseudo-democracy. 1/3 of the parliamentarians were incumbent military officers. Where do you have democracy on a platform like that? How could we even think that if you have 1/3 incumbent military officers and you call it democracy? And the sanctions were withdrawn. And now you know that, the Myanmar military must be laughing at the world. They look at this, they're more interested in money and business than anything else. So now we have an window opportunity because after 1st February this year, there is no democracy in all sense of the word. Not that Myanmar had democracy in any way, but, now at least we know there is no democracy. But more importantly, more than 1,000 people died, were killed by the Myanmar military, and still we don't see sanctions. It doesn't get into my, just think of any other country doing it. Even the other day, we got bashed, or Bangladesh got bashed on something. Probably the Honorable Foreign Minister can also talk on that also a little bit. Just imagine, I'm referring to the extrajudicial killing and all. But here, 1,000 people got killed, and still business as usual. And only pointing out, okay, we are sanctioning some individuals, that doesn't help because they don't have accounts there, they don't travel, you know, they don't need to travel to those countries. So I don't think we can, you know, make that a big thing out of, you know, when we say that we are sanctioning some individuals. Why I say window of opportunity? Because that is what is happening in the business area. When you kill 1,000 people, you know very well that it is weak. Myanmar military is weak, not strong. It can't be strong. If it was strong, it wouldn't have to kill 1,000 people. There is no hegemony, there is no consent. A state which kills 1,000 people means it's a weak state. It can't be a strong state. You don't kill people when you are strong, when you have the consent of the people. So since it's a weak state, what is happening, and I don't want to elaborate on that, we see the business interests getting a far better bargain because they want to keep them. Maybe earlier it was 70-30, now if they say it's 80-20, they say fine, no problem, you stay with us. If that can happen, I think this is also a window of opportunity to resolve issues, the Rohingya issue. And this takes me back to the 70s and the 90s. Both times we, you know, at least they were repatriated, not that the problem was solved, they got repatriated. And in both times, you know, you had the military government, not a civilian government. This is the first time we had an ethnic cleansing when you had a pseudo civilian government or government under Aung San Suu Kyi. Earlier it was when the military was in power. So since the military is now back in power fully, and since they are, you know, committing, you know, atrocities against their own citizens, they must be very weak. And this is the only way out before the final ICJ verdict comes out, where I believe, you know, question of reparations and all other things would unfold. So take this an opportunity rather than saying, oh, we can't do now that the military is back in power. So a far greater, stronger attention, intervention in terms of economic sanctions and others are required. And not to mention the global, I think if we can organize the global civil society on the issue of justice, I believe Myanmar military will understand that pressure has been built. But more importantly, I think the citizens, the common citizens of Myanmar would be happy if you do that. Because I'm sure by now they must be tired. And they must be waiting for a support. So I think this is the time where the international community needs to re-energize itself and work in a way where Myanmar finally would understand that things are not going in the way they should. And I believe one can start with some of the very good friends that they have, including, as I said, well, Japan started decoupling. India would be the other country, Thailand, Singapore has strong presence there. So these are the countries I think we need to work hard. And once it's done, I believe at least the conference that we have, or the workshop that we're now having would make some sense. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for your insightful speech. Ladies and gentlemen, let's move on to the next tape. That is, let's hear from our distinguished guest speakers. And let me tell you that I really know that you all have a lot to say from your huge experience, understanding, and knowledge, but our compact time schedule doesn't allow me to give you more than 2 minutes to speak, and I cordially apologize for that. So I expect your kind cooperation in this regard. So let's start with Professor Abdul Mannan, former chairman, University Grant Commission, Bangladesh. Sir, I'd like to know from you that from your long experience as an academician and university teacher, how do you read the pulse of our young generation, our young people? What do they think about the Rohingya crisis and its future?
Thank you very much. First, I would like to pay my respect to the Honorable Minister for Foreign Affairs, Bangladesh, Dr. Momen, and thanks to the two very eminent speakers. They have more or less gave us an idea about the Rohingya. I'm a little bit, I think I have some personal things to share, because I was in Myanmar with Shamal Dotto sitting there in 2013, if I'm not wrong. And we were invited by Aung San Suu Kyi, along with other members of the delegate, for lunch. And we tried to ask her, Shamal tried to ask her a question on the Rohingyas. But it was so unfortunate that she would not take any questions on Rohingyas. And then we asked Shamal to stand up and shout at the top of his voice. He did that, but it went unnoticed, unfortunately. Now, the Rohingya crisis is something that I have a personal experience, because my father was in Myanmar in his early childhood till 1943, when Myanmar was occupied by the Japanese. And the people of Myanmar was very hostile to the Indians. And he had to walk all the way from Rangoon to Chittagong, along with thousands of others. So Myanmar is a country which perhaps is a very unique country, which does not have any space for, according to their words, foreigners. It could be Hindus, it could be Muslim, it could be anybody, even Buddhist. If they are not Burman. They use, Dr. Imtiaz used the word Burman, I think, or Dr. Dilwar, the Burman. If they're considered not Burman, they don't have a space in Myanmar. So, having said all these things, actually, the Rohingya or displacement of the people of Myanmar started in 1962 when the Burmese army took over. And then that was not Rohingya, that was foreigners who were pulled out. In Chittagong, Musafir Khana, and along this place, there are a few hundred of these displaced people. Now, coming back to Rohingya, my reading about the young generation, the present generation of Bangladesh about Rohingya is, I don't think they are much aware of the intensity or of the importance of the Rohingya crisis in Bangladesh. Because present-day generation is more or less more involved with their own profession, with their own future, with what is their CGPA and what job they are going to get. But Rohingya is in the, something that can wait for them. So I don't have much, hope that current generation is very much aware of the Rohingya crisis that Dr. Imtiaz or Dr. Dilwar is, or many of us is here, because present generation is a different generation. They live in a virtual world, unfortunately. So to minimize this, I think it is the duty of the organizations like this today's morning session on the diplomats world and other media and us teachers to educate what are the major problems in Bangladesh. Not necessarily only Rohingyas, there are many other problems that affects our everyday life. So when you're talking about the present generation, I think there are a lot of works to be done, and that works will have to be done by the people who knows about the crisis and what waits in the future if the crisis is not met. Thank you very much, sir. And I would like to thank the presenters, Dr. Imtiaz and Dr. Dilwar, for giving us a sketch, of the entire issue in a very short time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Now, we'd like to hear from Mr. Proshun Rahman, writer, filmmaker, director of Rohingya-based films, The Birth of Land, Long Period of Persecution, and docu-series Ballad of Rohingya People. So, Mr. Proshun, probably you are the only one filmmaker who has made films on Rohingya issues, internationally acclaimed films. So, by doing this, you have gathered extensive experience and understanding about those displaced people. So, what actually they think about their future?
Yeah, when we're there filming, so I've interviewed more than 1,000 people actually. So they have shared their haunting memories, their misfortune, their hopeless futures. But deep down, there is a dream also to go back to their own land, the home they lived, the farming land they lived, the pond, their fishing over there. But you know, the longer it takes to get back, they're getting more disconnected from that hope. So it's what's happening. You know, the first feature film, The Bartland, story was told from the point of view of a pregnant woman who doesn't give birth her child on that densely populated Rohingya refugee camp. You know what, you may remember that Robert Sophia, German Christian handsome maid. When Robert Sophia was visiting several countries, and different country was giving honorary citizenship to that Robert Sophia. So I made that film from that point of view. There are millions of human Sophia doesn't have any citizenship. So that's the message I wanted to deliver to the world leader, what should be done actually with that. So, and then we made a documentary film, feature documentary, that has also screened all over the world, long period of persecution. So I was expecting, you know, during the time I was expecting more films actually from my fellow filmmakers, so from other countries, from other channels, international, you know, according to, including the fact and figures, their voice also very important. What I'm missing is the Rohingya voices. You know, their appeal is missing at the moment, and it should be more on the screen, on the medias, and every medias. You know, they wanted to go back. We want to hear this voice, and that should be done by film, actually. So we have interviewed thousands of people, and we have incorporated more than 100 in the films. How they were persecuted, how they want to go, how they are missing their homeland. But that voice is missing, actually, during the period. So we want to hear their voice also, including this seminar, discussion, and everything, analysis. That also has to go on, you know, in the repatriation process. But their voice also important. Their appeal, their crying also important. That should become on the media also.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Proshun Rahman. So now I'd like to hear from Dr. Muhammad Shohidullah, Professor, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujib Medical University. Doctor, you all know that with the arrival of about 1 million of Rohingyas in our country is witnessing an upsurge of a number of contagious diseases. So what do you think? Is our country safe from the potential outbreak of these contagious diseases?
Thank you very much, the organizers. Honorable Foreign Minister, keynote speaker, and distinguished delegates. It's about 1 million Rohingyas that had we witnessed the influx. And we all know that vaccination in this population is very, very low. And therefore, the contagious diseases are rampant. And it was feared very well. And unfortunately, there was 2 large outbreaks. One is diphtheria, the other is cholera, and sporadically there were some measles. Now, I like to share a good news that in Bangladesh, we have eradicated polio for last few years. We also controlled cholera, diphtheria, measles, and rubella through very good immunization system. And these outbreaks were so big threats that the neighboring population could have the disease. There was a very rapid response from the Bangladesh government side. The EPI people went there, and after their arrival, within 20 days, they introduced routine immunization, and also they had 16 campaign as of now. And thereby, the diphtheria, measles, rubella, and cholera are controlled. But unfortunately, there are few cases of diphtheria and sporadically measles are being detected in this year. So this information is a kind of a threat, that it is posing a threat that it may be transmitted to the neighboring population. And eventually, with the rippling effect, it may go across the country. So therefore, what I would say, that there are threats, the government is working hard, so we need to be careful about that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Muhammad Shahidullah. Thank you.